I'm joined now by Malou, a foreign policy analyst at the Washington-based Cato Institute, and Niall Gardner from the Heritage Foundation, also in Washington. So we've had an acknowledgement then that radical changes are needed and perhaps a reassessment of what victory means. So where does this leave us? What options do you think are now viable, Malou Innocent?
I think the first option that's very viable is to scale down the mission and begin to narrow our objectives. Right now we've seen a conflation between Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Al-Qaeda is a transnational jihadi network that was responsible for 9/11. The Taliban, the Haqqani network, other groups, these are guerrilla jihadi networks that are indigenous to the Pashtun tribes of this region. And if we begin to open the aperture and begin to broaden the number of enemies, we can see U.S. and NATO soldiers there in perpetuity, every Pashtun militant with an AK-47, and that will of course prolong the struggle and make us bogged down in a protracted guerrilla war that many countries and many of the publics back home would not want to see. So I again hope that we can narrow the objective and not begin to surge more troops into what essentially would be an open-ended occupation.
Is that a valid comment, do you think, Niall Gardner? I mean, it certainly would seem the objectives at the moment are so wide, that is what is making it difficult to make any significant progress.
I don't agree at all. I think that is a clear recipe for defeat, and I think it's this sort of defeatist talk that is swirling around in Washington at the moment that is preventing us from securing a full-fledged military campaign in Afghanistan. General McChrystal is absolutely right. He is calling for at least 40,000 extra US forces. We need those troops on the ground. Our goal has to be not only, of course, to defeat Al-Qaeda worldwide, but also to defeat the Taliban in Afghanistan, to ensure that Al-Qaeda is not able to launch operations against the United States, Great Britain and other European allies from Afghan soil. This is a vitally important war for our national interest, for the defense of our countries against a brutal Islamist enemy.
And yet, Niall Gardner, when I was talking earlier to Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Schaefer, he was saying that the US government needs to modify its policy so that the Department of State, the Department of Commerce, not just the armed forces, are going to be involved in this, because there's an urgent need, he said, to reassess what victory in Afghanistan actually means for NATO.
I think it's important that both the US and the UK be placed on a full war footing. I mean, this is a vitally important operation, part of a global war against Islamist terrorists, and we need to have the full resources of the US and the UK and our allies invested in winning this conflict. We can't talk here about negotiating a deal with the Taliban. We fight to win in Afghanistan. The stakes are extremely high. We cannot win with a half-hearted strategy. At the moment, Barack Obama is sitting on the fence. He's not providing the kind of leadership that we need to have demonstrated in order to win the war in Afghanistan. We need a clear signal from Washington that the United States is committed to winning the war there.
Malou Innocent, this is part of the problem in all of this, isn't it? That the dangers of the unknown if NATO was to pull out of Afghanistan is that instability in that region could potentially lead to real security threats for the West.
I will say this, I will say that there will be a perceived loss either way, whether we stay or whether we leave. If we stay, we'll appear to be bogged down, the strategy and the mission will appear aimless, and also we are sort of feeding into Al-Qaeda's narrative, which is that they want to bleed America to the point of bankruptcy. And when you surge in more forces, their counterinsurgency doctrine, we must remember, would require 200,000 troops in the South alone, 650,000 in the country entirely, in order to sort of clear, hold, and build. Right now what we see is that we're able to clear certain areas, but we're not able to hold, and that's because of the lack of troops. But even if you do surge those number of troops, there's a fear that we'll again begin to widen the number of enemies that we do face. And what we're witnessing right now is a local and regional ethnic Pashtun population fighting against what they perceive to be a foreign occupation of the region. There is no shortage of Pashtun militants on the other side of the border who are willing to foment more chaos in this region. And we also shouldn't look at Afghanistan in isolation. There's a great deal of Indian influence that's increasing within Afghanistan, which doesn't allow and doesn't create the incentive for the Pakistanis to stop allowing militants to pour over the border. So this is very much a regional insurgency. This is very much a regional context that we shouldn't lose sight of. And in that respect, this is going to be a perpetual regional stalemate. This cannot be won on the ground.
This is a debate we'll have to return to. No doubt we will. Malou Innocent and Niall Gardner, thanks both very much indeed.